The East Baton Rouge Parish Library believes that a thriving business community is good for us all. That's why we help entrepreneurs start businesses with tools like Gale Business Builder. Keep commerce rolling by providing access to computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi at 14 branch locations. Get a library card. Grow your business at ebrpl.com/business.
Started making beer at home and immediately fell in love with it. After just like the day of my first batch of brewing, I was already thinking, can I do this for a living?
Oh yeah, obsessed with it. He was totally consumed by it, and then looked at me one day and told me I was put on this earth to brew beer. And I was like, wow, that is such a bold statement. And if you can say that about anything, then you need to follow your dream and do it.
Good morning and welcome to Strictly Business. I'm your host, J.R. Ball. This webcast features conversations with Louisiana's most influential CEOs, entrepreneurs, and community leaders, with the goal of providing insights, ideas, and inspiration to help you and your business grow. Now, we want to keep Strictly Business as interactive as possible, so for those joining us live, here's an icebreaker question. Submit your vote in the comments and the results will be posted at the end of the webcast. Strictly Business is brought to you by the East Baton Rouge Parish Library and Home Bank. Without their support, this project would not be possible. This month, we're talking with Chris Meyer, President and CEO of the Baton Rouge Area Foundation. We asked Chris about changes he and his team are implementing at the foundation, how his background impacts his vision of the future, correcting system inefficiencies, and get updates on some key projects and initiatives being spearheaded by the Baton Rouge Area Foundation. Chris, welcome and thank you for being with us. You've been at the helm of the Baton Rouge Area Foundation for some 18 months, and I'm wondering what have been the biggest surprises you've encountered heading such a critical community foundation?
Yeah, well, look, thanks for having me on. I think, first of all, just the breadth of generosity in our community. I thought I had an appreciation of just how generous people are in Baton Rouge, but coming into the foundation and realizing that we, literally work with hundreds of individuals and families that over our collective history have given away over $700 million in our community, impacting nonprofits and good works. Is just incredible. I think two other things that kind of have surprised me, though, is, one being the number of people that maybe didn't know about Baton Rouge Area Foundation and how they could kind of plug into realizing the kind of impact they want to see in the community. And so that's been surprising to me. And then, third, as you know, last year when I came in, we released our city stats, and for the first time ever, it showed that a majority of Baton Rouge families were worried about their kids making a life ultimately here in the city. They didn't think their kids were going to have more opportunity tomorrow than they do today, and so those things really sort of hit me right in the face as soon as I came into the role.
Now, in sports, people often talk about the challenges of being the head coach who has to replace the incredibly successful predecessor. In your case, you're replacing John Davies, who built the foundation into a powerhouse, both financially and with its impact in the community. So what's it been like stepping into that role while also implementing your own vision?
Look, it's really exciting to come into an organization that's evolved the way it has over the last 50 plus years. I think when John started, there were about $15 million in assets, and giving was kind of limited in the community at that point. And today, like I said, you've seen over $700 million invested into our community. So it's exciting to kind of be at this place. I also realized that, I'm a different person, and I get to sort of be the person that helps this organization go to the next level. And ultimately, it's not about me. It's not about John. It's not about who comes after me. It's frankly, we're stewards of an incredible community institution. And our job really is to make this institution more relevant and accessible to everyone in our community so that we can see even bigger impact in the coming years.
One specific area of change that I've noticed is how BRAF is structured and organized. What's the reasoning behind that, as well as its objectives?
Yeah, no, I've noticed a lot of intrigue from the business report on this. Look, I mean, our real focus is on building a high performing organization, and like I said, I mean, my job is to help us go to the next level of impact in this community. And really, if you look at what we've announced so far as a foundation, earlier this year we launched the new Center for Nonprofit Excellence. It's really to start making crystal clear to the community how they can get involved with the foundation. We'll have other announcements coming soon around philanthropy, around our sort of civic leadership and impact projects, so that again, it's a sort of huge and very clear welcome, Matt, that if you want to see impactful things done in this community, there will be a way at BRAF, whether through giving, doing, or advising, that you can become part of the solution. And so that's really the sort of impetus behind some of the reorganization and building and continuing to build a really talented team.
What do you see as the ongoing role BRAF should play in the growth and future of Baton Rouge and the surrounding capital region?
Yeah, I mean, look, we are a deeply trusted, well-respected organization. I think we've been involved in just about every issue of consequence and substance in our community over the last 50 years. And that's something that we absolutely are going to continue. I think what's maybe new is how we can focus on an agenda that really drives opportunity and prosperity in our community. Everything from excellent education options to community safety, economic prosperity, quality of life. What I want BRAF to really be able to do with our community is be a partner for helping to leave this community better than we found it. And again, I go back to a majority of parents are really worried about whether this is going to be a place that their kids can thrive in ultimately, or be welcoming to others that want to move here. I think BRAF's got to be part of that solution, because we've done that in the past, and I know we can do it in the future.
Now, you alluded to this earlier, but one of the most important annual projects the foundation does is the compilation and release of city stats. It sounds like that will continue. So given that, how will city stats and perhaps other data-driven projects influence or drive foundation initiatives?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you asked about that. I mean, like I said, last year and city stats has really been a sort of annual way to look at how we were doing as a community, some key perception data, how people thought, the opinions they had about certain issues. What we really want to make sure going forward is that city stats can sort of really give us the sort of longitudinal look at, are we doing better in the issues and areas we know drive opportunity. So our focus has really been on this thing we're calling the opportunity agenda, which has pillars focused on those levers we know are most likely to drive higher prosperity, better outcomes for people in our community. And we can see this in communities all across America. I mean, the great thing happening in this country, and frankly, why I love focusing on kind of the city and neighborhood level, is that you can really see a lot of different strategies by nonprofits, by government, private business partners that are working to make our community stronger. And that's not just happening here, it's happening across the country. And so city stats is going to be our way to track really annually, how are we doing sort of with that opportunity agenda? What are the real results happening on the ground with folks here? And then what are new initiatives that we and others are partnering on to really tackle, so that we hopefully are building both the reality that things are getting better, but also the perception that it's getting better. And I think when people participate in the solutions, I think that builds their confidence that this is a place where we can actually get things done.
There were those in the past who joked that BRAF was something of a city parish shadow government. And by that, I think largely some of that dealt with because John Davies wasn't sort of an out front credit guy and preferred working behind the scenes to sort of initiate conversations. Other initiatives like the train, for example, the water campus, those were obviously much more visible. But with you now in charge, what will be BRAF's role in shaping community conversations and various initiatives?
I think on one hand, it's great to have a trusted organization that doesn't care about credit and is willing to kind of operate behind the scenes to help move projects along, particularly projects and initiatives that will outlast administrations and are not the flavor of the day. I also understand, on the other hand, to some that has felt, BRAF at times has felt very unapproachable. Look, this is not a country club. It's not a social club. It's not a shadow government. We are the community's foundation, and what we want to do is continue to operate in a way that it can be trusted and does not care about credit. We don't need our names, my name, in the headlines. That's not what we care about. What we care about is getting stuff done. And what I want to do is make sure that people understand this is a welcoming institution to grow philanthropy. We think everyone in this community can be a philanthropist. We want to make it really clear by reaching out to nonprofits that we can be a place to help them expand their impact. And then we want to be an institution that when there's a really sticky situation, that there's not a clear sort of driver or leader in the community. It takes multiple agencies and businesses to come together to sort of solve a big problem. Hopefully BRAF will continue, and my plan is that it would continue to be the place that we can, dream the big ideas, have the hard conversations, and then put a plan together and follow that plan to make sure we're ultimately reaching the goals we set.
And to build on that, I think for the average person, they think of the foundation, they think of some of these large dollar donor funds, or they may think of commercial properties and what have you. But the reality is, you have the opportunity for individual memberships and other ways to give that don't require setting up $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 funds. So, it doesn't really matter where you're at on the financial spectrum. You have the opportunity to get involved with the foundation if you want.
That's exactly right. And one of the things we'll announce soon, so I'm teasing a little, but it'll be a new center focused on philanthropy, is making it really clear, giving people on-ramps into philanthropy. Because I think people in this community give their time, they give their money, frequently, but we want to help them do it in ways that achieves the impact they really want. And one new way that you'll also hear this year is our new civic impact funds. So these will be funds. Our first one was around community safety and safe BR, where we are allowing anyone in the community that cares about community safety. There are clear goals, there are clear initiatives. You can get involved in giving to a specific initiative. You can give to an overall fund, but everyone can be part of the solution. And I think you're so right that our job is to really build those on-ramps and make it super clear about how you get involved, whether you have $10 or $10,000.
Well, of course, down here you're viewed as a Yankee because you were born and raised in the Shreveport area. So, and while what I find interesting is because even though you went to one of the best high schools in the state at Caddo Magnet, your family at times struggled to financially make ends meet, which I'm wondering how that experience of being less economically fortunate than many of your classmates, how that's impacted who you are today, and perhaps how those experiences shape your views on what BRAF should be striving to achieve.
Yeah, it obviously, any of our backgrounds shape kind of who we are. And I think for me, it's really understanding how fragile families can be at times, both economically, housing, et cetera. But the main thing I really take away from that sort of experience growing up was about the extraordinary opportunity that I got that unfortunately many of my friends didn't. I was really inspired by a middle school teacher that pushed me to go to, like you said, Caddo Magnet's one of the best high schools in our state. And what was so remarkable for me was that it was a school that everyone in that organization was aligned to sort of pushing, encouraging us as students to think beyond where we lived. So I started, hearing about college. I started sort of seeing examples of what success would look like beyond my own family, because we didn't have examples of people who had been in sort of, professional jobs and whatnot, and never dreamed about going off to other places. And so this really for me was one of those, opportunities that changed the trajectory of my family. And it really felt kind of happenstance, because a lot of, my friends that lived on my same street, that we went to church together, they didn't get that intervention. And, they've lived good lives, but there wasn't anything different I felt between us in terms of our aptitude or any of that. Is just that I got put into an environment that continued to open doors day after day, and theirs were not. And so that sort of drove my passion about the challenges in American education, education here in our state, and certainly the way I think about now BRAF's role is being this trusted institution, having the sort of influential power, the economic power that we have. We've got to use that to really drive those initiatives that will most create opportunity in our community, because I think there's a lot more kids like me that, given an opportunity, a second chance, a third chance, I really do think unlocking 20% of that potential, 30%. I mean, you imagine what we can do as a community and a state if we focus on things like that. So yeah, it influences the way I think about systems, the way I think about service, and ultimately, this belief that our state, our community can be better. We just have to do the work of using our power and influence when we get it to creating more of those opportunities rather than holding on to it.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a follow-up, but what can or will BRAF be doing to expand economic opportunities across the spectrum of this community?
Yeah, so specifically, we've launched this opportunity agenda, and behind that, BRAF will, we really want to be a source of knowledge on our community of where we're doing well, where we have opportunities to grow. We'll be releasing this year something called the Opportunity Data Project that's attached to the work we're doing in city stats. And really along all those levers of what we think most elevates a community, what we think, based on research, could most unlock more opportunities for more people, like excellent education, like a focus on kind of healthy families and strong and safe neighborhoods. We're going to begin to have a real deep look, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, of what's really happening in those communities, and where are there existing assets that we can expand upon? Where do we need to partner with others to build kind of new initiatives to sort of uplift those communities? And so I think you'll see, BRAF, again, really intentionally trying to help show to the community, philanthropists, business leaders, government leaders, here's the state of play in our community. Here's how we got here. And then here are solutions that we can try as a community. And hopefully we can align on some of these and push these initiatives forward. Because again, communities across this country have been faced with similar challenges that we have. And there's examples of things that have worked and things that haven't when they've wanted to tackle those. I want BRAF to be a place that is always curious and is pushing those solutions with partners.
And so after graduating from Tulane, you worked with Teach for America, then earned a master's in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School, and became a White House Fellow. How did those experiences help shape your views on public education, your support for school choice, and then in 2012 becoming the founder and CEO of New Schools for Baton Rouge?
Yeah, I mean, really after teaching in New Orleans, both before and then after Katrina, I was in displaced to LaPlace, teaching at East St. John High School. I saw up close, particularly in New Orleans before Katrina, the dysfunction of the Orleans Parish School Board. And I think at the time of Katrina, half the school board was under indictment. The system worked for adults, not for kids. And so after Katrina, my sort of curiosity really, grew into one of understanding how government and government systems work well and when they don't, and what we can do about that. Fast forwarding, New Schools for Baton Rouge was really an attempt to learn the lessons of how education was sort of reinvented in New Orleans post-Katrina. That's an opportunity that you don't necessarily want from that circumstance anywhere else in the country. But it really was remarkable that I think city leaders, more than not, made a better opportunity, a better system of schools for its community. And so New Schools for Baton Rouge was really an attempt with the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, with government, state leaders, and local community members to prove that it doesn't take a hurricane to create transformational change in a school system. And so that's sort of, my experiences at the White House, the Department of Defense, in grad school in New Orleans, and all that shaped me to continue to be curious about how do systems work, where do they sort of fall apart, and then how can you sort of overhaul them when you don't have the sort of catastrophic event like we did in Katrina. And I think largely over the last decade, if you look at what we did while I was at New Schools for Baton Rouge, and obviously that good work continues, you've taken now a city where, only wealthy and kind of well-informed families had access to really good schools. Today, we're in a city where you have close to 12,000 kids. I think it's going to be higher this fall when students start school, choosing a school they didn't have before. And these schools are in higher demand. They're getting better results. And so we are showing that a community really can come together and build a sort of better model for public education that actually is responsive to the needs of kids and families.
You've alluded to inefficient systems a couple of times, and
Yeah.
For those who don't know, you worked with the Department of Defense, serving under Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, straddling the administrations of Presidents George W. Bush and then Barack Obama. So, what were your big takeaways from that experience, particularly as it relates to identifying and improving inefficient systems?
Yeah, I mean, Secretary Gates was an incredible leader, and I had the fortune to kind of work close with him over that time, travel with him, sort of observe him in meetings and support him in different kind of policy aspects. But really in complex organizations, there's sort of this a fool's errand to think that you can change everything. I think what he was great at, and what other leaders taught me during that experience, is you really have to be great at sort of prioritization, thinking about what are the things that will move the needle the most. What is sort of your why? Why are we doing this particular initiative, and then holding people accountable to that. And that works whether you're in a small organization or a complex one. And I really watch, the secretary, for example, was, we all were extremely worried about the sort of armored vehicles that we were using in Iraq versus Afghanistan. And at some point we were using the same vehicle. And in Afghanistan, obviously, when you're on mountainsides and whatnot, I mean, we were seeing a lot of vehicles turn over. We were also, experiencing different types of sort of mines that were being exploded. And so we were told by contractors, well, we can't sort of, move a better equipped vehicle to the field faster. And Secretary Gates said it's nonsense, because his priority was keeping troops safe as best we can, knowing they're out there, sort of completing the mission. And so we had one of the fastest sort of procurement and sort of delivery to the battlefield that we'd seen since World War II. And it was all because, as he would tell me, if I don't care about that, what signal does that send to everyone else? And so through that, while that was something he got deeply involved in and understood sort of soup to nuts, and was monitoring it daily and holding his secretaries accountable, it was also sending a signal to the rest of the organization about his values, his leadership, and I think tangentially had the effect of making some other things that it would be impossible for someone managing a $600 billion organization with 2 million people to focus on every little thing that needs improvement or needs more efficiency. But I think it's all about setting priorities, leading with a really clear why, and then holding people accountable.
And I would think those same questions or objectives transfer easily to the private sector as well.
Yeah, I do. I mean, the thing, again, sort of picking up on Secretary Gates, but other, leaders that I'd met during my time in DC and since then is, I think this was an Einstein quote about spending, more time on the problem than you do on the solution. And again, when I would watch Gates up close, he would study an issue to deeply understand the kind of root causes. What's actually driving the problem? How did we get here? Because it's not because of one issue, it's usually, compounding factors. And by deeply understanding sort of what caused this thing, oftentimes a solution becomes readily available. But I remember, he was, for example, when it came to those vehicles I just referenced, we went out to the battlefield. We were in Iraq and Afghanistan to understand on the ground what were the soldiers dealing with that problem. We went and toured the plants where they were being built, right, to understand, well, what's the manufacturer's challenge. We then looked back inwardly at, where are our sort of procurement policies and how can we sort of cut through the bureaucracy that says, well, you can't do this because. He was a yes if kind of guy. So I think that applies in the private sector too. That I think with all of our teams, we've got to be really clear about why we're looking at something or why we're making a decision, whether there are most senior deputies or they're sort of the person at the bottom of the organizational chart. Everyone, I think, can be more effective when you communicate to them why you're doing something. And then I think spending time on the root causes and then deciding kind of what you're going to elevate as a priority. That really is a sort of formula that ultimately can build sort of accountability and higher performance in any organization.
Now, we're in the heart of hurricane season, and clearly extreme weather events are more frequent. So what role does the foundation play in disaster management?
Yeah, look, I think, the foundation's, history and sort of awareness by others about, what the foundation's good works have been really came through in natural disasters, particularly after Hurricane Katrina. The first thing we do is really prepare. I was with community foundation affiliates across the state a few weeks ago where we were sort of tabletop exercising, again, borrowing some things I learned in my time at the Department of Defense. We were working through scenarios of if this, then that, and really making sure that folks understood the sort of playbook we built last year when I got here around how we would respond and how we would add redundancy to our partners. Because, most often, Baton Rouge being the high ground, it's really that we are mobilizing to help other communities or others in our region that may be without power, they're offline. So first is just making sure we're always in a state of readiness. Second, I think the foundation plays a huge role, obviously, in raising resources, both in anticipation of an event, but also when one actually hits. And so that's partnering with the state. Most often, we are sort of managing the official state fund, so national corporations and others can sort of give, and we can get money quickly to the front lines, which gets to the sort of third point, that is deeply understanding needs on the ground. We've got an incredible network, and now even more so through our Center for Nonprofit Excellence, of understanding needs on the ground, who's doing what work, when and where. And so we've again, part of preparing is going through those lists, talking to those organizations and making sure we're ready. And then when the storm hits, adapting the plan, because, it's sort of once you get punched in the mouth, all your plans go out the window. And so I think being in that state that we can continue to sort of drive resources to the front lines in the response mode. I think the sort of maybe new thing, the foundation, that really, when we think about this opportunity agenda, is like the sort of New Orleans education example. We know in South Louisiana, and we've had 3 major events sort of just hit Baton Rouge in the last 15 years, and not even speaking about our friends, sort of in the West and the Southeast. So we know it's going to happen again, that there's going to be, unfortunately, these sort of disasters that can sort of disrupt our community. I think we have to also think about long-term response and rebuilding, and how, when those events happen, we are ready, not just to respond to the immediate needs, but we use them as an opportunity to build something even better than we found it. And so that's one where a lot of our community foundation partners were beginning to think about, with local elected leadership and other businesses, how do we have some of these plans on the shelf that allow us to maybe do our infrastructure differently if, God forbid, we have an event that takes some of our sort of assets out. So that's where I think, again, a foundation can be a source of bringing people together, focusing not only on the immediate and driving resources to the front lines, but also having a perspective in the long run that we don't repeat the same mistakes of the past. And so I hope that BRAF will continue to kind of play those roles with our partners.
Yeah, I know CPEX is dealing with some of those front end issues, but also the Water Institute, which I believe is a underappreciated gem in this community, but and a huge source of potential down the road. But that aside, your view on how the water campus can play a role in help addressing some of these challenges on the front end to help sort of mitigate the impact when disaster does strike.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Water Institute's partnership with our Coastal Protection Restoration, Authority, CPRA, it's really remarkable the sort of investment we've made as a state, and obviously leveraging, the disaster that was the BP oil spill, but leveraging those dollars to fundamentally deal with what is an existential crisis. I mean, we are washing away as a people, and dealing with not only the sort of science behind how we build projects that are cost effective, that have the biggest benefit given the limited resources we have, but then the sort of human element of what does it actually take to work with communities that they're losing their economic opportunities, literally their homes, way of life. I mean, that is something that unfortunately in South Louisiana, we are going to have to continue to deal with. And so I think the Water Institute and kind of its next chapter of impact, really will I think put a bigger focus. I hope puts a bigger focus on what's happening here in Louisiana. It has become such a national gem that you've got communities all over the country wanting it to help develop master plans to deal with water in their communities. I think the leadership there really wants to put a bigger emphasis on South Louisiana and how what we learn here can be exported, across our state and across the world. But that campus focusing on resilience, focusing on not only the sort of science behind the right places to divert sediment and not, but really then dealing with the other effects that make our community stronger. I think we actually have the chance to build a campus that is far more interdisciplinary than just issues of water and water intrusion.
Well, speaking of water, maybe one of the more visible projects, just because most people drive by it every day, is the Lakes Project, and it's underway. I mean, there are barges out there and things are happening. So could you give us an update on the short-term timeline on that project, as well as maybe its broader importance to the community?
Yeah, I mean, this is a project that really started back in 2008 with an initial core report that the lakes were dying. You took a while to sort of bring different community leaders together. I mean, the lakes are owned mainly by LSU, but then there's other lakes that are owned by the city. You have BREC involvement. So all of a sudden, the Army Corps, you get to a problem where a lot of people were, not putting any blame, but it was who's ultimately responsible. And the answer really is it's all of us, because it is such a great community asset. So after the initial master planning that BRAF really catalyzed and its donors helped support, we've now brought folks together to where we can complete the first 2 phases of this project, which will dredge the main lakes. It will get them to a point of depth that is healthy enough. This will take, over the next year to 18 months, because the land we dig out of there ultimately is going to be used to create new parks and new bikeways and, really amenities that I think will be world-class for our community. And so connecting those lakes, making them much more sustainable, building on a spot of great civic pride, but also promoting a project that is critical to our stormwater plans. This really became one that kind of checks every box of why we ought to pay attention to this. And then, I think we also need to focus on how we make sure it doesn't get back in the situation that it found itself in. And so really focusing as we come out of this project on who is going to be responsible? How do we set up an entity that's focused on sustaining that with the right funding so everyone can enjoy it? I think that's going to do a lot to build both momentum and pride, but also encourage people to come back to Baton Rouge.
Chris, thank you for making the time to join us today. It's been a pleasure to hear your vision for the future of BRAF as well as our community. Thank you.
Thank you, JR.
And thanks also to our viewers, as well as our sponsors, the East Baton Rouge Parish Library and Home Bank. Please join us September 20th for the next edition of Strictly Business. Until then, enjoy and make your day a great one.